Hey guys, welcome back to Clownfish TV. This is Kneon. I'm not here with Geeky Sparkles in this video. I'm going to talk about the comic book industry, and I'm going to talk about Larry Hama, who was the writer of G.I. Joe for decades and who created the backstory for so many of the most beloved G.I. Joe characters and really gave personalities to these toys. And we're going to talk about kind of the state of the modern comic book industry and how it doesn't take care of you, right? I mean, the adage that comics will break your heart, that is entirely true. We're going to talk about this because this is actually not just a Marvel thing, but this is also a Hasbro thing. And this is the same mindset that Hasbro has when it comes to Dungeons and Dragons, right? Things that they've acquired, that people that worked on these amazing franchises that made them money year after year after year after year, and that are still very active and very capable of producing work that has value, that they're not getting the money they need to live on, you know, to retire. And I would like to say that I'm shocked, but as someone who spent about a decade kicking around the con circuit, and I got to talk to a lot of people who worked for Marvel and DC, and these are people that I really admired when I was a kid and a teenager reading comics, and I heard their stories. I'm like, you know, why are you no longer working in comics? You know, why did you quit comics? That was usually how naively I'd ask them, why'd you quit comics? Why'd you stop making comic books? Why'd you stop writing comics or drawing comics? And usually the answer was, I didn't. Comics quit me. That's basically what happened. I wasn't the flavor of the month anymore. I wasn't getting called for whatever reason. In the case of artists, my art style wasn't in vogue anymore. You know, I drew like somebody from the 70s and 80s, and in the 90s, if there wasn't a bunch of cross hatching, they didn't want you, right? As a writer, you're only as good as your last book, and you know, I worked on stuff that's just not popular now. I'm not edgy enough. And so these are the stories I would hear time and time again. I mean, legendary people working in comics, you know, even Neil Adams, he was kind of like, well, I make more money in the con circuit now. Yeah, it's like, it's crazy. So we're going to talk about Larry Hama and where he's at in Hasbro and how they treat their people, because we've done multiple videos about Wizards of the Coast, and now we're going to talk about G.I. Joe. Again, this is another Hasbro owned property, and Larry Hama not getting paid as much as you would think he would. And this might explain, I'm going to be honest, I know there was some controversy when the Snake Eyes movie came out, which I still haven't seen. By the way, I have zero interest in seeing this movie. As far as I know, he's Snake Eyes for a total of like 5 minutes. And he's basically the guy from Crazy Rich Asians running around with his mask off the whole time. Like, that's not Snake Eyes. But there was controversy around it because they made him Asian in the movie. And for those of you who actually read the comics that Larry Hama wrote, Snake Eyes was actually a blonde-haired, blue-eyed white guy with a hamburger face that fell in with his ninja clan, and he was like an outsider, and that was like a big part of his storyline. But Larry Hama said that, you know, in retrospect, he wished he'd made the character Asian. And that might be how he feels about it. I don't know. But then part of me is like, or is he saying that because the movie's out now and he wants paid? You know, I don't know. Because you don't want to be, you know, the guy who created these characters, and then the movie comes out with these characters that you technically don't own, and then you're kind of like shitting on the movie, and then they don't call you for anything. You know, that's kind of a weird situation to be in as well. So let's talk about this. Because it's sad. I don't want to like bust out the tiny violin for Larry Hama or anything. I have a lot of respect for him. Anyone who grew up reading G.I. Joe and Transformers comics in the 80s, like I did, you know, respects the hell out of Larry Hama. So I don't want to be like, oh, poor Larry Hama. No, not at all. But it is an eye-opening post. Let's talk about it. Before we get into any further, please subscribe for more pop culture news, views, and rants. Guys, go out and listen to the audio version of Clownfish TV and Derezed, which is our other podcast, which deals with like video games and the paranormal. Believe it or not, those two things, we kind of mashed them up. And that's where we do our interviews and stuff. So this is the Skybound campaign on Kickstarter for the G.I. Joe Compendium, which has done almost $4 million. I believe is the largest comic book project ever in crowdfunding, if I'm not mistaken. And apparently Larry Hama does not get paid. He got paid for his book plates, but he's not getting paid by Hasbro anymore. I know he is getting work. I know when, IDW, he was getting work at IDW and he's getting work at Skybound now, which Skybound's doing an amazing job. By the way, it's so weird. Like, we talk about the mainstream comic book industry getting it wrong. At least so far, the Skybound stuff has been pretty good. It's actually better than what Marvel and DC are putting out, which I know the bar is pretty low, but the fact that these toy books are better than Superman and X-Men right now, that says a lot, right? And yeah, so it's good to see these characters are still popular if they're in the right hands. Because look at the huge difference between the sales and the fan reception to the Skybound version of these characters compared to IDW. IDW ran G.I. Joe and then Transformers into the ground, right? They got weirdly political. They didn't understand the assignment, right? They didn't understand the characters in a lot of cases. Not in every, I mean, there were some good things here and there, right? It wasn't like a complete bust, but they did, over the course of several years, run both of these franchises into the ground. Hasbro took the license away, gave it to Skybound, and now Transformers and G.I. Joe are like two of the best-selling books out there. So who's working on these books matters, right? It absolutely positively matters, and whether or not they have respect for the source material, which so far Skybound has. Now, they could go off the rails. Some people said that, I haven't read the Scarlet series yet. Some people said Scarlet kind of goes off the rails. But anyway, yeah, Skybound, 10,000 people backed, $4 million. And Larry Hama doesn't get royalties. This is actually coming from Rich Johnston. So this isn't the first time Larry Hama has talked about his current situation. Now, this is a guy who's, again, created legendary, or helped create, rather, legendary, pop culture figures like Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow and all the backstory there. And you would think that Hasbro would take care of him. You'd think Marvel would take care of him. No, they don't. He's in his 70s. He's still working. His page rate hasn't gone up, I guess, in decades. And now he's staring down the barrel of having to work for the rest of his life, it seems like, so and it's sad. I mean, it really is sad. And again, I'm not trying to shame Larry Hama. I'm definitely not at all. This is comics. This is corporate America. This is how it works. And his story is not unique. I've heard of so many people that have worked on so many great things over the years, and the companies that profited to the tune of billions of dollars. And in the case of Dungeons and Dragons, billions of dollars in tabletop sales. And some of the people that worked on these books are living on assistance. Some of the people that contributed to this mythos can barely get by. They're having to do the convention circuit just to make ends meet. And it's very, very sad. So this is the original story was coming from Bounding in the Comics that iconic G.I. Joe comic book creator Larry Hama reveals health issues will likely leave him incapable of drawing within the next few years. Yeah, he has problems with his eyes now, which does happen often with comic book creators. I worked on, or had the pleasure of working on some of Don Rosa's work when we put together the Fantagraphics Don Rosa collection. I worked on, I think the first 6 or 8 books, and I got to re-ink some of his stuff. I recolored some of his stuff, and he just didn't have the capability to do it. I mean, he didn't work digitally anyway, but like his eyes aren't good. And that happens, when you're squinting over an art table for decades. This happens. Larry Hama says, I have macular degeneration. I'll probably be incapable of drawing within the next few years. If you want to sketch, better act soon. My arthritis may make everything moot before then. I have no ligaments left in my basal thumb joints. It's just bone scraping against bone there. Drawing is actually quite painful, but not as painful as signing my signature. He said he's getting bombarded with commission requests. I don't do commissions through the mail. I do pencil sketches, but only at cons. There are many comic shops these days that have facilitators who take customers' comics to cons and have them signed or graded. If you can't get to a con, ask your local shop. And I know he was having an issue because people were apparently sending him requests to draw them free sketches, and like, how freaking rude of you to do that for anybody. I mean, it's just like But we get requests like this. Could you do this? Could you do that? Whatever. And I'm like, I can't, because if I do for you, we have to do for everybody. And I realistically can't do it. And it doesn't mean he hates people, but a lot of these people, they'll turn around, they'll be like, hey, you drew me a Snake Eyes. Cool. I'm going to sell it. I'm going to flip it on eBay. But this is heartbreaking. This is coming from Bounding in the Comics. And Rich Johnston's actually been doing some journalism lately. I give him credit for that, right? He posted on Facebook, Larry Hama said, I don't get a cent from the vast majority of G.I. Joe reprints, nor do I get anything from all the Wolverine material that is reprinted in 17 countries outside the USA. Again, back to Don Rosa, how he stuck it to Disney, and part of why he doesn't work on the Duck books anymore is that Disney wanted, because when you are a Disney Comics licensee, you agree that Disney gets to own all of the material that you produce while you have the license, and it goes into like a global pool of stories that any other publisher that has a Disney Comics license can pull from and translate and do whatever they want to do with it, right? Well, they were selling Don Rosa, Scrooge McDuck collections, and he wasn't getting anything for it, so he trademarked his name. So they can technically reprint those stories, but they can't, publish them as Don Rosa collections. And he had a huge falling out with Disney. I don't remember the specifics, but he was not happy with them. They wanted to own his original artwork too, which was kind of, and that's a very Disney thing. But that's how he kind of got around it. So now he does get paid. When a company like Fantagraphics releases his work, he actually does get paid for that, which is good. That's good. This is again coming from Bleeding Cool, not to be confused with Fool. It's true. That included the recent G.I. Joe Compendium that Skybound put out on Kickstarter. It did $3.8 million. It was his 1980s work. As part of the license with Hasbro, neither paid Larry Hama for the reprints of his work, which are owned by Hasbro. This is why Skybound hired Larry Hama to sign limited edition book plates as part of the Kickstarter's higher donor pledges, so Larry Hama will at least get a share of that money. It's also why Skybound has hired Larry Hama to continue G.I. Joe, a real American hero series, continuing the Marvel IDW line in continuity, which Larry gets work for higher payments. It's not great for Larry, who along with other Marvel creators only get incentive payments on reprints of work published in the USA. Licensing those rights to other countries does nothing for the original creators. That's true. Something brought to light a few years ago. Just a few years ago? You guys didn't know this? I thought you were a comic book journalist. You didn't know this? This is normal. This is how it works. Something brought to light a few years ago, and Brian Hitch was declined to sign the Hatchet hardcover UK reprints of Ultimates and the like. Yeah, it's true. Disney, when they own your stuff, and I think it probably works similarly with Marvel now that Disney owns them. Yeah, they can just let other countries republish your work, and they don't have to give you another cent. I mean, my stuff's been it's stuff I worked on 15 years ago is being reprinted in like freaking Peru. Like, I have no idea where the hell this stuff is printed, because I got paid for it at the time, and that was it. But it was work for hire. It was understood. I think in a case like this, though, I think if you're making, in the case of G.I. Joe, we're talking about an evergreen franchise worth billions of dollars. I know the movies have been dismal failures, right, for the most part, but like the G.I. Joe franchise in and of itself is worth many, many, many millions of dollars. And Hasbro never really stopped. They kind of paused it for a little bit. And it's really weird. I was talking to a friend of mine about how he's really into G.I. Joe, and how G.I. Joe, for a while, Hasbro the website didn't even go anywhere until they brought the classified figures out, the 6-inch figures. It was very weird. It was like they just wanted to pretend G.I. Joe didn't exist, but it's back. So we had a couple of years where G.I. Joe wasn't a thing, but other than that, it never really stopped, right? Because, we had the 60s and 70s G.I. Joes, and then we had Real American Hero, which was, kind of Larry Hama's baby. He created the whole backstory and everything. As far as I know, he did most of the backstories and all that, because they worked very closely with Marvel. Hasbro did. And it was same with Transformers. They had, Bud Badansky, who did, I think, the backstories for the original Transformers. And Denny O'Neil actually named Optimus Prime, though, which explains why his name doesn't sound like the rest of them, I guess. But anyway, so like they worked very closely with Marvel and Sunbow Productions and all that. But yeah, so we went from Real American Hero, and that lasted until the 90s. And then we had a couple years where it paused. I think they had like G.I. Joe Extreme or something. And then we went from that to the retro line. I remember Toys R Us had the retro line in the 90s. And then we went right from that to they had the 2000s figures, which it's weird because if you go out to Comics Beat, he's actually selling some of the early 2000s G.I. Joe figures. He's selling these off, figures from his personal collection. I'm like, does he have to? Is that what's going on? But yeah, these are some of the 2000s figures. We went from that, and then we went to like Sigma 6. So G.I. Joe's like never stopped, right? And you would think a company like Hasbro, worth as much money as they are, that they would kick the guy a couple $1 million. You know, seriously, what is it to your bottom line to send Larry Hama $2 million, $3 million? You know, thank you for your service, Larry. You know, figuratively, and, you know, just thank you for helping us create a brand that is still beloved. Like when people think of G.I. Joe, they don't think of the 60s G.I. Joe. Mostly people today, when they think of G.I. Joe, they think of the 1980s series, Real American Hero. And that was Larry Hama. And like, again, a mega corp like Hasbro, they could find that, well, I would say they could find that in the couch cushions, but like they're kind of hurting now too. They're laying people off, but still, like you're making millions and millions and millions of dollars. I'd love to see their financials, because I'm sure a company like Hasbro has all of it squirreled away somewhere. Like how many millions of dollars or possibly billions of dollars have you made off of G.I. Joe over the years? And how much of that was because people were invested in these characters because they had actual personalities and they weren't just toys? Because the Joes that people care about are the ones that were fleshed out. You know, Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow, Duke, Scarlet, those characters. You know, there were so many Joes, but so many of them didn't have like personalities. They were just kind of there. But the ones that, actually did have a personality, a lot of that you can ascribe to Larry Hama. So yeah, it's not great. He's doing this Kickstarter for himself. What's he going to do? Sell more sketches? He posted to social media, I have macular degeneration. I'll probably be incapable of drawing within the next few years. If you want to sketch, you better act soon. This is what we talked about before. And now he's got Mounties versus werewolves. I don't know if that's going to burn up the toy aisle or anything. I mean, it's an interesting concept, but like this is the problem with the comic. One of the many problems with the comic book industry is it does chew people up and spit them out. And this is why we don't cover the comic book industry very much, because it's depressing as fuck. I'm going to be honest. It's depressing. It's sad. I go to comic conventions, in between the people in Artist Alley that are just like wannabes that just are desperate for you to buy something from them, and a lot of people who had these fantastic careers that have been treated like shit by these corporations. And they're in their 60s, 70s, some of them in their 80s, and they're still doing the con circuit. Like, you should be retired, just parking it by the pool with the grandkids or something. You shouldn't be doing this now. So there were $20 con sketches. I used to do them for free, but when I was at con in Canada and all the artists ganged up on me and said I was making them look bad, when they were free, I would also often find them in the trash. Folks who had no idea of what G.I. Joe was asked for sketches because they were free, but then got tired of carrying them around. If something is free, it has no value. I think that's kind of true. I mean, I know, again, I keep bringing up Don Rosa, but I love Don Rosa. I do. But he was doing free sketches at Baltimore, and he enjoyed doing it. And this is after he was having problems with his eyes. But there were a lot of people that were in line. They didn't even know why they were in line. And they were angry that he didn't have paper there. He's like, I will do a free sketch for you of Scrooge McDuck, or, one of the nephews or something, or Donald, if you have your own paper. And nobody had their own paper. So I actually had my Bristol pad with me, and I was like handing out paper to people in line. But I'm kind of like, you don't even know who this guy is. Like, you don't understand. If this were Finland, the line would be around the freaking block for this guy. Like, you have no freaking idea who this guy is, what he does. You probably don't even know who Scrooge McDuck is, other than like the Mickey's Christmas Carol. You have no idea. But yeah, so it's that is true. He said it changed even more. He said a few years back, I was charging $20 for pencil sketches. I was at a con. I was getting no takers, so I went out to lunch. When I was out, Neil Adams walked by my table and was incensed at my sketch price. He went to Kinko's, had a new sign printed up, raising my price to $100 and replaced my old sign. When I came back from lunch, I had a line. When I asked Neil about it, he said, if you don't charge enough, people think it's valueless. Lesson learned. Wow. Yeah, that's interesting. Neil was, man, think of him what you will. I mean, one, he was one of the best comic book artists that have ever lived. And yeah, he had a lot of kooky theories or whatever, but man, that guy knew how to work a con table. He made a lot more money working cons than he made working for like DC or whatever. But it's sad. This is the comic book industry. This is what needs to change. And what incentive is there for people to get into comics now? If this is the future you're looking at, that you help create these amazing characters that make these corporations hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars, and you have to work into your 70s and your hands hurt and your eyes are failing you. I mean, what kind of future is that? Why? I can't imagine why more people aren't getting into comics. I can't imagine why there's a brain drain, a talent drain in the comic book industry when you can do literally anything else and make more money and actually have some kind of a retirement or something. You know what I'm saying? It's just, it sucks. It really sucks. But there you go, guys. Another comic book cautionary tale, but I am glad that he got money off this campaign. It was pretty amazing. It's up to $4 million now. They're doing sales after the fact on backer kit. So if you want it, I think you can still get it. Gonna wrap it up. Please subscribe. We'll talk later.